have a forum for those of you guys who are joining us live to ask some questions today. So, and that's what I want to talk about next is going to be the format. So we're going to have a focus topic for discussion today. We're going to try to keep it at about 30 minutes or so, but we kind of get carried away sometimes. So I don't know, but we'll try to keep it at about 30 minutes, and then we'll cut and we'll go to a part 2. So when we end part 1, for those of you guys who are live with us here today, stick around and you can ask your questions to me and Stephen after the show. We are recording this session today, so if you want to go back and share it with friends and family or your boss or some of your coworkers, you can get to this recording at govology.com /YouTube. Also, govology.com /Roundup is our URL. So if you want to continue joining us, we've got to sign up for each of our shows. We do this on the third Thursday of each month, so you can sign up there. So without further ado, I'm going to close this down here, and we're going to get started in just a second. All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of GovCon Roundup Live. I'm Carol Bernard, co-founder of govology.com, and I'm excited to be back with my fantastic co-host, Mr. Stephen Prince, the one and only, aka the Far Whisperer. So today we're going to dive into a topic that's super important for small businesses in the federal marketplace, and that's counting what matters. And we're going to talk about new legislation for small business metrics that's been proposed out there, and also the work that remains. We're going to also explore why accurate, meaningful metrics matter for small businesses trying to succeed in government contracting. And we're going to dig into a couple of bills that Stephen recently posted on his LinkedIn newsletter, small GovCon Roundup newsletter on LinkedIn. And this is some legislation that could help to move the needle in the right direction. But we're not going to stop there. We're going to also take a look at what still needs to be done and how you might be able to also make a difference out there, whether that's engaging with the SBA or speaking with lawmakers. There is an opportunity to help push for changes that can continue to level the playing field. So without further ado, Stephen, I would like to welcome you back to the show. And the good news is that episode 1 was such a success that our network executives gave us the green light to keep going.
Well, hey, I mean, those executives are kind people. They're generous. They're you. You know what? Now, I'm excited to be here. Glad our first episode was a hit with the audience, and excited to talk about the SBA Small Business Scorecard, some of the metrics that are used for keeping track of the success or lack thereof that the government is having in awarding contract to small businesses and various subcategories of small businesses like your women-owned small business and hub zone and so forth. Because as anybody knows who's a sports fan, statistics drive performance, and we're in a statistics-driven society right now, a metrics-driven society in a lot of different fields. Those of you, the Moneyball era in baseball continues in every sport now. And I think that the SBA scorecard and the statistics, the goals, all those things are not just data points. They are in large part driving the performance of the agencies in trying to meet this the overarching policy goal, which is to provide fair opportunities for small businesses to receive a fair proportion of federal government contracts each and every year. And so kind of excited to have this conversation about those numbers, why they're important, where they could be improved, so that in turn we can improve the performance in certain areas where the government continues to be falling short.
Yeah, awesome, man. So, the time of this episode couldn't really be better because you just posted on the latest update on the SBA's scorecard. And what I would like to ask you, if you could do, is for our listeners who really haven't had a chance to maybe read that article that you just posted, I think yesterday, on the SBA scorecard, maybe you could give a little bit of a recap on that. And also, how does that relate to kind of what we're going to talk about today, which are 2 bills specifically, HR 818 and HR 1816. And in fact, these were just two of the bills that you wrote about in your article last month that was titled Eight Small Business GovCon Bills to Watch in 2025. Unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about all eight within the hour here today. So we decided to focus on this too. So I'll yield to you and let you bring us up to speed.
Yeah, fantastic. And I don't know, you don't want to spend a whole afternoon talking about legislation? No, all right.
Well, we
So
could if you want to.
we could, yeah, people would start falling asleep at some point. So we'll limit it to two for discussion purposes. But yeah, please check out that article where I have a few paragraphs about eight bills that I think should be of note to the small business community moving forward. We'll focus on two of them today. So the U.S. Small Business Administration, SBA, every year publishes what it calls a scorecard. And the scorecard is supposed to be a measure of how well the government is doing in achieving its various goals for awarding contracts or contracting dollars, really, because the goals are based primarily on dollars, to small businesses, and then four specific subcategories of small businesses. And those are your small disadvantaged businesses, which include, but are not limited to 8A. It also includes self-certified SDBs, which I think we may be talking about a little bit
Yeah.
later. You've got your woman-owned small businesses, service disabled, veteran owned small businesses, and hub zone small businesses. And so the scorecard tracks dollars awarded to those businesses as well as percentages of prime contracting, or we really should say eligible prime contracting dollars. Not going to get into what is eligible and ineligible, but it's eligible prime contracting dollars, what percentages of those are being awarded to each of those categories, and then comparing them to statutory goals that are set forth that Congress has developed for each of those categories. For example, you've got a 23% statutory small business goal. And so with the SBA, we'll take a look at all the contracts that were awarded that were designated small business awards or awards to small businesses, and then just determine whether or not the percentage exceeded 23%. There are actually 10 total goals out there. The heaviest weighted goals are the five I just mentioned for prime contracting dollars. The same five categories the government tracks at the subcontracting level. There are subcontracting goals for each of those categories, and that's another 5 goals. You say, well, the government's not awarding those dollars. No, but through its requirement that large prime contractors or other than small prime contractors adopt subcontracting plans, the government's pushing dollars down the chain toward those companies. So that's being tracked as well, but it's not as weighted as heavily in the SBA's scorecard. And then the government also tracks the actual number of prime contractors, of the unique prime contractors that are small businesses. That's only about 10% of the weight of the scorecard goal, though, under SBA's formula. And by the way, this is a formula that SBA has largely developed outside the statute. The statute doesn't provide the level of detail on weighting and such that the SBA has independently developed. So SBA does that, and then it assigns a letter grade to the government. Again, the statute does not require a letter grade. The SBA, in its own volition, has done this. And to each agency that is a participating agency, which is most of your main prime contracting agencies, are assigned a letter grade for their performance over the year. And so the SBA just yesterday released, which would be the July 15th, for those of you who are not live, released the annual scorecard. This is a once a year thing, and it relates to the previous fiscal year. So this is for fiscal year 2024. The SBA gave the government an A for its small business achievement. That is not surprising. I've been on my soapbox many times saying the letter grades, it's great inflation, it's easy A's, all this stuff, because the SBA has given the government an A every year since 2012. And most of the agencies got an A too. So you may say, well, that's great. But then that means that everything is perfect. In fact, no, of those 10 goals I mentioned, five prime contracting, five subcontracting goals, the government hit 6 of them. So 60%. That means the government failed to meet 40% of the goals. And also the number of unique prime contractors dropped. Again, it's dropped more than 50% over the last 15 years. In fact, so that's an annual decline. And so when you look at the data underneath the scorecard, it's not as rosy as that A makes it appear. And that's one of the reasons why I have repeatedly over the years said, hey, SBA, these A grades are doing a disservice to federal contractors, because the headline is we got an A, we award a lot of money to small businesses, and yet the data is much more mixed. You've got categories of small business like woman-owned small business, which are still, the government has not met that goal. but you wouldn't know that just from seeing that they got an A. So that's where we stand right now. We got this brand new set of data, but it is sort of similar to previous years, and there's some good news. Absolutely some good news. The government exceeded the 23% goal by a lot, for example, up to 28.76%, but still missed on its hub zone prime contracting goal, its women-owned prime contracting goal, a couple of subcontracting goals, so forth. So mixed bag, A grade. I wasn't going to be named valedictorian if I failed 40% of my classes in my school, but that's kind of the system that we're working on with the SBA scorecard right now.
Yeah, and then that dovetails into the two proposed bills that you wrote about then last month, and you want to talk about how this can potentially maybe move the needle to change some things with the way that scorecard metrics are being graded or taken a look at, but also with regards to the new proposed bill about that woman-owned certification program.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Congress, as I said, has set out the goals. Those goals are in statute: 23% goal for small businesses, 5% goal for women-owned small businesses, and so forth. Each of these five categories has a prime contracting goal. There's a couple common misconceptions first about the goals. One common misconception is that the goals are required. It's a required 23% set aside. I've even seen that on the SBA's own website in various places a couple times, and that's completely wrong. It's a goal. It's an unenforceable goal. And the second misconception is that the goals are about contracts, like the number of contracts awarded to a company. In fact, the goals, the prime contracting goals, are dollar based. They're a percentage of, as I said, the eligible prime contracting dollars. So, one $100 million contract is going to be scored as $100 million toward the goal, not as one contract, and vice versa. A lot of small contracts are not going to be worth as much in the goaling as one large contract, potentially, for example. So
Mhm.
it's a percentage of goals, or a percentage of dollars, excuse me. Um, One of the problems that I at least believe exists with respect to the way that the score is being calculated and ultimately this A grade achieved every year under the SBA's formula is that prime contracting dollars are given an outsized weight. As of last year, about 57% of the weight of the scorecard was prime contracting dollars. And why is that potentially a problem? Well, what it means is that, for example, if you have an 8A company, a single 8A company that's awarded a $250 million contract, and some of these 8A firms, especially those that may be entity owned by Alaska Native companies or tribes or whatever, are capable of winning these giant contracts, that counts as a lot of dollars toward that category, but it doesn't mean that a lot of 8As benefited from that. Only one 8A company benefited from that award. And so there's been a heavy emphasis on the number of dollars that are awarded to small businesses, but very light emphasis paid on the number of unique small primes that are actually engaged in the federal market, that are actually winning federal government contracts. And as I mentioned, kind of in passing earlier, over the last 15 years or so, that number has fallen by about 50%. And that's a dramatic decline. So as the government in the same period has been getting A's almost every year, the number of small primes that are doing business with Uncle Sam has dropped dramatically. It's dropped by 50% or more, dropped again last year by about 0.57%, I think. Again, and not a falling off the cliff drop, but a continued trend of dropping. And there are a number of factors associated with that. You can argue, though, this is all due to consolidation and GWACs and strategic sourcing. And yeah, there are a lot of factors that may play into that. But I think one of the factors, again, getting back to my discussion about how statistics drive performance, is that when the agencies are being evaluated on their small business achievement, they're being evaluated almost entirely on the dollars. And so it doesn't matter to them so much whether they have one 8A with a $250 million contract or 10 with a 8As with a $25 million contract. They get evaluated the same pretty much for that. There's not a lot of emphasis paid to how many small businesses are are winning contracts, and there's even no emphasis in the scorecard to bringing new entrants into the market, because
Yeah.
it's something that frequently comes up in conversation is how are we encouraging new companies to come in? We're seeing companies exit the government market at the prime level for various reasons. How are we encouraging new companies to come into the marketplace? And so this first bill that I mentioned is called the Spur Act, HR, and that means House of Representatives Bill 818, the Small Business Procurement and Utilization Reform Act, or Spur Act, would simply say, okay, SBA, when you're doing this annual scorecard, we require a consideration of the number of small businesses that receive a prime contract for the first time ever, and fit in one of those categories that we're talking about. So one of those 5 categories. So a first-time small business awardee, a first-time hub zone company, a first-time 8A contract for that company. And so that's a metric that right now is not considered at all in the scorecard. There's no credit given to an agency for saying this is your first ever hub zone contract. And so we brought somebody into the hub zone marketplace for the first time by awarding them their first hub zone contract. So that sounds pretty unexciting, like, oh, we're going to add something new to the scorecard. But I actually think it's an important step, because it recognizes that dollars are not the end all be all. That if we really want to have a broad base, a broad industrial base of small businesses, we need to be focused not only on the dollars, and I'm not saying that's not important, but on the number of small businesses that are winning these contracts, and on bringing new entrants into the market and incentivizing agencies to find solutions to bring these new entities in the market, and take a chance on a new company who's coming to the market for the first time. And so this bill has gotten broad bipartisan support. And so I don't always just post on bills that are just out there because there are thousands of bills introduced every year. Sometimes I do if it's really relevant and the bill just kind of sitting in committee. But what really gets me excited is when it looks about a bill is when it looks like it might have a chance of becoming law, like a good chance of becoming law. This bill, I think, does. This bill was introduced in the House a few months ago, I think back in March. Advanced through the House, or maybe even earlier. I think it was maybe introduced in January, because earlier this year, February or March, it advanced through the full House on a bipartisan vote. 384 to 25. 384 to 25. So overwhelming support for this bill in the House of Representatives. And we're not living in a bipartisan era, right? Everyone knows that. We're in a highly partisan era. So finding something that everybody could get behind, or almost everybody, 25 naysayers here, is pretty extraordinary. So you've got a bill that advanced 384 to 25 bipartisan vote through the House, goes over to the Senate, and if the Senate feels the same way, then it's going to be something that's going to be adopted there too, hopefully signed into law by the president, or perhaps rolled into an omnibus bill like the National Defense Authorization Act. We'll see. But this bill does have some support, because there is this mindset among policymakers too that we need to draw more entrants into the market. And just focusing on the number of dollars is not going to drive agencies to do that. But if we can change the performance metrics to drive the performance, we can maybe incentivize agencies to want to bring in new entrants to the market. So that's the Spur Act.
All right, yeah, and then so there was another one, which was the bill about really doing away. Well, there was already the elimination of the self-certification for the WSBs, but there was still some allowability to count the self-certified firms in the goaling program, which again skews the numbers. And we can kind of go into a little bit more detail about self-certification programs and some of the challenges that self-certification poses. But you want to talk real quick about this specific with regards to the bill for WSBs and what it looks like may happen here soon.
Yeah, it's a great bill. Another one that I happen to know. I'm not a lobbyist by any stretch. This is all just my personal
You
opinion.
should be.
But I personally, I should be. If someone wants to pay, no, I don't want to be a lobbyist. No, but personally, I support the Spur Act, and I support this next one too. It's called the WSB Accountability Act. So looking at the scorecard data, the SBA just released, it's kind of extraordinary when you dive down to the WSB number, the women-owned small business number, because you look at the government and they say, look, the goal is 5%. We did 4.97%. You say, well, that's not bad. Like, you have 4.97%, you still should be able to get to 5, but we're heading in the right direction. And that's true. The previous year was 4.91. Awarded $31.7 billion to women-owned small businesses. Okay, that all sounds pretty good. How are we doing in terms of woman-owned small business set-asides, though? How many contracts are going WOSB set-aside? Because you hear anecdotally women saying, "I get the certification, I'm not seeing set-aside contracts out there." Well, the annual scorecard tells you, yeah, you're not wrong about that, women, because the percentage of dollars that were awarded as a result of woman-owned small business set-asides is also in the data, and it's 0.35%. 2.2 billion versus, remember, 4.97% was awarded to these companies, or to women-owned small
Yeah.
business companies, but only 0.35% came from set-aside contracts. And so the current system is that to win a WSB set-aside contract, you have to be certified. It's been that way for several years with SBA. Congress eliminated WSB self-certification for set-aside contracts. And so the 0.35%, you can say those are definitely certified women-owned small businesses. But for the government to claim credit toward the 5% goal, for the company does not have to be a certified women-owned small business. It can self-certify, and then when the government awards a different species of contract, like a small business set-aside contract or an 8A set-aside contract or sole source 8A contract, if the company has checked the woman-owned small business box to self-certify, the government counts that dollar toward the WSB goal. And that is, of course, problematic for a couple reasons. First of all, we can argue about whether double counting should occur. But more to the point, a lot of, in my experience, again, this is just in my personal experience, a lot of self-certified companies don't actually qualify for that status because these are complicated rules about ownership and control. And this is not a fraud thing. This is not me saying that a lot of companies are trying to defraud the government by self-certifying as WSBs. What I'm saying is that a lot of
Although
companies,
some do.
some do.
Yeah.
Some do. Not, I wouldn't say a lot, but there are absolutely some. Fewer, I think, now because you don't get prime contracts for that, right? You know,
Yeah.
you could try to defraud to get a subcontract. But a lot of folks just think they're WSB because the woman owns 51%, and yet they're not meeting the control requirements. You've got a man who's maybe a high officer position or whatever. And so they don't actually qualify, but the government's counting it toward the goals, toward that 5% goal, and that's that huge gap between the WSB set aside number and the dollars that are being counted toward women-owned small business. So this bill, the WSB Accountability Act, would simply plug that loophole. It would stop the SBA from counting self-certified WSBs toward the 5% goal. Instead, you could still do the double counting. If you awarded an 8A contract and the company was a certified woman-owned small business, you could count that toward the WSB goal too. But if the company had just self-certified, you couldn't count it. And so that's what that bill says. It says, SBA, you got to stop counting self-certification toward that 5% goal. I think that if this bill passes, you're going to see a lot more women-owned small business
Yes.
set-asides because it's clear to me the government is relying on double counting to get to 4.97%. They're not relying on WSB set aside vehicles. You take out all the self-certified companies, that you got to find
Yes.
more ways to get the dollars to the certified companies. And so this bill is also was very popular. Folks may know the group Women Impacting Public Policy, the WIP. They
Yeah.
supported this bill on Capitol Hill. You talk about lobbyists, you know, that they're better at that than I am. And was advanced by the Small Business Committee in the House unanimously. Again, a bipartisan unanimous vote in committee on the House floor. It was done on a voice vote, which again is akin to unanimous. That means that no one demanded that there be a vote. The chair just says, like, I hear everybody saying yes. I don't hear anybody saying no. Unless anybody objects, we're going with yes. And nobody said I object. We got to count the vote. And so it's essentially de facto unanimous. It's not the same. So don't come and say, oh, you said a voice vote means unanimous, but it's sort of without objection, without somebody saying we need to count the votes. So again, strong bipartisan support for this bill in the House. It's now in the Senate. We'll see what happens, what the Senate does with the WSB Accountability Act too, which again, as I mentioned, some of these women-owned small business advocacy organizations are in favor of this bill, saying we want to make sure that we have a certified WSB companies are what's being counted. That's how we make sure there's integrity in this data here, as opposed to just anybody who went to certified, self-certified, regardless of how good their due diligence was, or if they were even trying to do some fraud. Which, you know, there are those folks out there too. So yeah, that's the second bill, the WSB Accountability Act.
Yeah. And hey, kudos to WHIP. I mean, this is going to be a big win, just like Steven said. I mean, And if you really if it didn't register what everything that Steven just said, I mean, really where this matters is when these self-certified firms are counted towards those dollars. And even if it says, hey, we met the 5%, now the agencies don't really have that much of a incentive to continue to try to push to get those dollars to meet those goals that were already stated, right? So I'm sure that they don't want to see what was the percentage on the scorecard of the ones that were
For the scorecard for the ones that were dollars actually awarded through WSB set asides is 0.35%.
out of
And so,
5%.
out of 5%
So that
goal,
wouldn't look too good.
no, you wouldn't want 0.35%. And so yeah, I think agencies just right now are just like I said, they're assuming that we're going to pick up most of our WSB dollars just kind of by by accident when we award contracts under other vehicles and somebody has that on their SAM profile. And so you take that away, at least for self-certification. Now how are we going to get above 0.35% or some higher number, because some of the double counting is for certified firms? Then the way to get there is to start using WSB set asides more often, which are just not being used very much right now.
Yeah. So I think this is going to be a great thing. I wanted to also then talk about, Steven. So we talked about the five major goaling programs, and you got, again, the SDB, small disadvantaged business. You got the 8A, well, not 8A, SDVOSB, Hub Zone, the WOSB. Well, I left one out. Which one did I
Let's
leave
see.
out?
We got small business itself, WSB Hub
Oh yeah,
Zone,
small business. I
SWSB.
didn't say
Yeah,
it.
there you
Yeah.
go.
So
Yep.
so of all of those now, really the only ones that don't really have the formal certification, and this is at the national level of the five. So small business, you just you put your revenue in and your employees and kind of auto calculates there.
Yeah.
But
Cross your
the other
fingers on affiliation while you're at it,
right.
because that's where people get in trouble usually is affiliation, not in counting their employees or revenues.
Yeah,
But yeah,
good point. Yeah. So the other one now that remains then is the SDB certification. All right. And so that's still a self certification. And again, and Stephen and I have talked about this before, but like as long as there's those self certifications, there's going to be misrepresentation. And like Stephen said, a lot of times it's unintentional because everybody feels like a disadvantaged business. And in fact, probably everybody is to some degree. I mean, like when you look at the two categories of what qualifies as like socially and economically disadvantaged, I think almost all small businesses start out can say, I'm economically disadvantaged.
yep.
And maybe sometimes they read that and it's not in, socially or economically disadvantaged, but maybe it should be, and maybe more should qualify under the program so that really they could take advantage of the 8A business development program, which is really designed. And I wanted to also talk about a big disadvantage that nobody's really talking about, is that all small businesses start out with in the government marketplace is that a performance and an experience disadvantage, right? And I think that's what Stephen was alluding to a little bit earlier, which is like you've got, well, first off, there's stats that kind of show that about 80% of the businesses registered in SAM or more never get a government contract, and a lot of those are small businesses. And and then of those, those contracts go to, they're not just like small businesses like we are here at Waypoint America and Govology. I mean, sometimes they're $50 million, $100 million, and sometimes could be way more than that, depending upon what the NAICS code size standard is. And so you're seeing a lot of the big dollars going to a lot of the same firms and being counted towards the goals. And so this is why we wanted to really come and talk about this and say these bills are great, but we believe that change can still be made, and we believe that change is still needed out there. We believe that change is needed in the self-certification program, like the SDB, because again, when they report that 5% SDB goal, it's going to be partially just like the WOSB has been. It's going to be part of it that's not going to be actually to firms that actually meet the regulations and what the regulations define as a small disadvantaged business. And Stephen, I know you and I talked about that before. We've even written some blog articles about Don't just, tick the box on SDB. Make sure that you're understanding what that means because you really don't want to misrepresent yourself.
Yeah, I mean, STB is the last one out there that's not just the ordinary small business self-certification, where it's one of these complex ownership control type programs, but you can still self-certify, again, not to get prime contracts. There's no such thing as an STB set aside or sole source contract for self-certified companies at the prime contract level, but you can do that for purposes of the goaling and for purposes of subcontracts with large prime contractors under their subcontracting plans. They can take credit for a award to a self-certified STB subcontractor. Uh, what do SBA regulations say as an STB? And I've had conversations with people who say, "Yeah, I felt disadvantaged. I clicked the box," or, I'm a minority, so I assume that's a minority business program, and so in which it's getting less and less due to court decisions and the current administration's kind of preferences in that regard. So, but neither of those is true. If you look at SBA regulations essentially says self-certified SDB must meet all the criteria of an 8A company, except they're not certified. Essentially, it's a self-certified 8A, and that could be
And that's a lot
somebody.
of criteria.
It's a
I
lot of
don't know
criteria.
anybody that's going to be, I don't know one person, I've never met anybody
Nope.
that's be like, I just went through all of the criteria and I ticked the
No,
box. I'm good to
they don't.
go.
I mean, you got net worth and income and all these funky rules. In fact, SBA, I think this is one area. Hey, SBA, if you're listening, you need to do a better job of explaining how to people how to meet this criteria, because there are actually criteria in there that as a former practicing lawyer, it made me scared because I don't know how anyone could actually do it. Like they would say, hey, if you're in an 8A program, for example, and you want to take outside employment outside the 8A firm, you need to get SBA's permission. Well, in the SDB program, the rule says the 8A rules apply to you. That rule then theoretically applies to you, except the SBA is not going to give you permission because you're not certified SBA. They're going to be like, 8A company, they're going to be like, we don't know what you're talking about. So how would you even get that? How do you even make that happen? I don't know. So I think SBA needs to flesh out and probably simplify for folks if they're going to keep self-certification, how you do that. Because I honestly do not know how you could be 100% sure that you qualify as a self-certified SDB given the way the rules are currently written. But assuming you did the very best you could and said there are certain rules I just cannot comply with because they apply only to 8A, you still have a whole list of very complex requirements that you must meet. And again, I don't know anyone either who has really dived into those and been assured themselves they meet all those criteria. And the numbers are pretty striking here too, because we talk about the government's SDB category in the goaling. Well, last year that was $78.3 billion and a 12.127% of eligible dollars that went to the small disadvantaged business category. That includes both 8As and self-certified. So 12.127%, which I count that as meeting the goal because the statutory goal is 5%, but it was actually a 13% goal under the previous year. So you could argue that they didn't meet that goal either. But then think about this. 8As, much of that 12% plus was awarded under 8A set aside contracts? 4.03%. 4.03% under 8A contracts. And so that means that a large percent, 8% or so of the 12 is really going to self-certified companies, of which, my opinion, big chunk of those don't actually qualify. In fact, and like I said, not sure how you can 100% be sure that any of them qualify, but a big chunk of those companies don't qualify. And so you've got a real problem here with respect to counting all these dollars towards self-certified companies, all these dollars towards self-certified SDBs, when in fact the only ones that you can be sure actually meet the criteria are the certified 8As. The rest of them maybe do, maybe you don't, depending on how you look at how you apply the 8A criteria in a self-certification world. But a lot of them, even giving the benefit of the doubt that, yeah, you don't need the SBA's permission to take outside employment. Okay, but you still don't meet this net worth requirement, or you don't meet this ownership division requirement. These rules are the most complex of any of the small business programs. So it's an area where I think there's room for improvement and room to think about, does this make sense? Does it make sense for the government to have a goal for self-certified SDBs, or should it just be an 8A goal? And that's a policy question that maybe Congress should be looking at.
Mhm. Do you know if there's a equivalent of WHIP to SDB?
I don't know an organization specifically like that, but of course there are a lot of veterans organizations out there that
Yeah.
do lobbying as part of what they do. And so you can think of, I'm not going to name names, but you think of your major vets organizations, and a lot of those have in the past, for example, in the famous Kingdomware case, came in and were
Yep.
supporting that. So yeah, I don't know that there may well be, and I would love if someone
Well,
in
I
the
know.
comments wants to list one, but a lot of the veterans organizations have a lobbying arm as well.
Yeah, and I know that there's a lot of nonprofits out there that support socially disadvantaged businesses, and so if that's you, my suggestion would be maybe look into who's the leadership over at WIP, Women Impacting Public Policy, get their blueprint. I think that there is a push that needs to be also then made for an equivalent bill to be pushed through for the SDB certification, and then uh, there's not to say there's a certification, but if you just take out those self-certification goals and make it really the 8A certified firms is the official, or maybe you do make it an SDB certification or something. So, but there's one more, Stephen. I also like before we wrap up, I also just wanted to make a mention of it. It's not in the major five that's going to attract at the federal level. Maybe it should be, but that's all the Indian Small Business Economic Enterprise, otherwise known as ISB. That one is still also self-certification, and I would guess I don't know, but that's tracked in a different way, but it probably would have some similar issues to all the other self-certification programs that are out there as well. So I'd like you to just kind of comment on that, but also let me get a part two of this question in. Is that if you are out there and you are a business that has one of these certifications and you're being maybe impacted by self-certified firms that shouldn't be there, I guess what can you do to raise the alarm, to maybe impact policy? I guess there's also the option to protest is another one, and police yourself, because I think, and I've told this to small businesses before, but like you're going to be the best police of your competition to keep them in line, because you guys all need to play by the same rules. And there's not like a contracting police out there necessarily just going around monitoring all this like you could be. So go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, and I think that, just very briefly touch on the ISB question. Yeah, we haven't talked about that here. That's an important point. That's another preference program that exists, but the reason it's not included kind of in this annual scorecard and in kind of my discussions of these major goals is because it's not a government-wide program. It really applies to the BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs, and the Indian Health Service. Those are the entities that have the statutory authority to kind of make those types of awards for the ISBs. And so yeah, a lot of these programs are similar. You've also got, of course, on the DOT side, there's a Department of Transportation's DBE program, which bears some similarities to
Yeah,
8A. So
what's
that
going on
so
with that one, by the way?
that program is like, yeah, that we don't need to get too much into that one of this week,
That's
but yeah,
another show.
that's another show. We should actually talk about that as part of another show because there's court
Yeah.
cases challenging aspects of that program as well. So again, that's a separate one that is not wrapped in with this discussion, but still another preference program that's out there that we should be thinking about as well. So yeah, I would say that that's going to ultimately be either Congress or perhaps BIA IHS could look at those certifications on the ISB side. DOT is currently engaged in some litigation on that side, so I think that might be a good question for moving forward. With respect to kind of self-policing and that sort of thing, yeah, we're in an interesting world now with respect to protests because um, it's hard under the protest regime to protest a self-certification of the kind that's causing these problems within the data. And
Mm,
by that I mean that before,
yeah.
when you allowed women-owned small businesses to win WSB contracts as a self-certified companies, you could protest that self-certified company if you lost a contract to them and say they're not eligible. But if you've got a small business set aside and you lose the contract to a company that is a small business and you don't think they're ineligible in that regard, and you notice that they've self-certified as a woman-owned small business, can you protest that? No, because that woman-owned small business wasn't necessary for them to win that contract. They didn't have to
Sure.
check that box to win that. There's no prejudice to you in that, right? Now you could still maybe argue they made a false claim and all that stuff, but I don't think that's probably going anywhere because the woman-owned small business status was not necessary for them to win that contract.
Hmm.
They could have checked no, and they should have been treated no differently if it's a small business set aside than if they checked yes. And so I think you've fallen in this legal gray area where you may say they're incorrectly checked the box, we think, but we don't know what to do about it. Formal protest might not do the trick. We might have to go to you send what you have to the SBA IG, you send what you have to the agency IG, you send it to the contract officer. Try to get somebody interested in the fact that you
Are the
think this
IGs
company
still employed these days?
right. And so you go fall into the question of who's going to have the time to say, well, I don't know, they didn't get any federal dollars out of it, so what do I care? Like there's, but ultimately it ends up mattering because these they say, well, it doesn't matter, whatever, they could have gotten that contract anyway. Sure, but now those dollars count toward the WSB goal. And now that's one more case in which the agency says, oh, good, we got the dollars there. We don't need to do a WSB set aside because we're doing all
Right.
right on our goal. So these things add up. So it's a tricky area to try to challenge it as a contractor because of the nature of the problem. The nature of the problem isn't that you're losing contracts to these folks on the individual level who are self-certifying, but they're wrong. The fact is that you're maybe losing contracting opportunities because work isn't being set aside because company after company has potentially improperly certified and is taking the government's taking credit for those dollars. They don't think they need to do a set aside for your
Yeah.
category. I mean, it's a tricky question. That's why it's really ultimately,
Mm.
to my mind, the solution has to come from the policymaker
Yeah.
level, from the
Yeah.
congressional level, because that's where the problem lies. It's no longer really solvable by individual small businesses. It's solvable by Congress, and so that's why I think this WSB Accountability Act is important.
Yeah, as we wrap up this, and then we'll head into our Q&A session as well. I'm just thinking, and as you were speaking, Stephen, I just keep thinking, we'll continue to watch these bills, and again, kudos to women impacting public policy. And I think that if this goes through, that's the blueprint. If you care about your certification and you don't want to lose opportunities to firms that are not actually certified, perhaps reach out to the folks at WIP, ask them, what was their blueprint and follow it. And there's a lot of supporting organizations out there, for SDBs, even though we don't know of any like Small Disadvantaged Business Association. Maybe you should set that one up since you got some time on your hands.
Well,
So,
there is an 8A organization, they would be
yeah.
in, so they may
Yeah,
say, hey, if
well,
we,
there is the 8A, and
yeah.
then
Mhm.
also I know that there's the Minority Supplier Development Councils, big national organization, and I know that they also some of those entities help folks get their 8A certification program. So I think this one would be the call to action for those of you guys out there that care about it, is really, let's get that last SDB certification or the self-certification not counted towards the goals, so the actual certified firms can count it. And then we take one more step to leveling the playing field, as they always continue to talk about leveling the playing field. But even within that, there's still a lot of work to do. So, Stephen, thank you so much for bringing to light the article. Thank you for the discussion that we had today. We'll look to see an update on those bills, and I'll give you the last word before we head out into the Q&A.
Yeah, it's a good discussion as always. With respect to this issue of self-certification, I think it's worth noting that the service-disabled veteran-owned small business that just switched. There's
Mm-hmm.
a bill. Congress did this on the SDVOSB side a couple years ago, and SBA implemented this with a rule in 2024. but the rule took effect October 1st, and those of you who are contractors know what that means, different fiscal year, right? And so the data we just had for SDVSB at the subcontracting level did count self-certified companies. Next year's annual report will not. And so it'll be interesting to see what that does to the SDVSB data next year. And we'll see, of course, I'll continue to keep folks posted on the SPUR Act, the WSB Accountability Act, and other bills of note. If you want to follow me on LinkedIn as various people do. Only a few of them are fake people, like Jamie Dimon of the famous investor supposedly followed me on LinkedIn. I was like, oh, that's cool, except it was fake Jamie Dimon. But a lot of real it's like a lot of fake profiles on LinkedIn these days. But there are a lot of folks who are following me to learn about the government contracting stuff. So I'll continue to post on the goals. I'll continue to post on the bills, and you and I will be back. And next time, maybe we'll fit it into 30 minutes. But when I start talking contracting data, I don't know that I can do it. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Stephen, and we'll end on that. And thank you so much for those of you who joined us today live. For those of you guys who may be watching this on demand, again, if you want to join us in the future on a live show and jump in to the Q&A with us, go to govology.com/roundup. Also, I highly encourage you to subscribe to Stephen's newsletter on LinkedIn. That's GovCon Roundup newsletter, and we'll post a link to that for those of you guys in the chat. But you can also easily Google GovCon Roundup newsletter, find, subscribe. Stephen shares some really great updates. I've been following him for years. It's been my go-to way to kind of help to stay up to date. So hopefully between Stephen's newsletter, I would like to also give a plug for the smallgovcon.com blog, which Stephen had started at his law firm, and that's continuing to go on today by the great folks colleagues that he worked with there, who also now owns Co-Prince McCall. Man, I always mess that up.
Cobras McCall Potroff, yeah,
I'm
they do
glad
great
that.
work. And yes, go back into smallgovcon.com. You can see all the updates that they're posting. And if you want to read, my ramblings on GovCon from about 2012 through 2021 or so, I've got 1,000 articles plus on that site as well.
All righty. So thank you, Stephen, and thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next month.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Now let's head into the Q&A portion, and I want to pull up my Q&A box here and see if we have any questions. It looks like we have a few. All right, you ready for this, Stephen?
We'll see. We'll see what's going on.
All right. So, first question. Hey, Stephen, what do you think the grade should have been? Also, do you think there's a higher chance of fraud now that the decline in small business set-asides continues to slip and primes become increasingly desperate to meet goals?
Yeah, I mean, two different questions. And so yeah, I mean, what do I think the grade should be? C plus, B minus, something like that. I mean, it's a mixed bag, and I don't want to just be the negative guy who only focuses on the bad things. Like I said, the government exceeded its small business goal. Small disadvantaged business, you could argue they didn't meet the goal because it was increased by the previous administration to 13%. But 12.27% is the highest that I believe it's ever been done. So I think that's good. Again, we can argue about whether you should count self-certified companies, but that's the rules we're playing under right now. So let's evaluate, under the rules we're currently playing under. That's a good number. Women-owned small business didn't meet that goal, and so I'm like, well, that's got to, it got close, but didn't meet it. So that's service disabled veteran-owned just sneaked above that goal. Didn't meet the hub zone goal. In fact, that was going in the wrong direction. That's down a tick from the percentage from last year. So, to me, when you look at the goals and you say, look, they missed 4 out of 10, or maybe 5 out of 10, if you want to count the STB goal as the 13%, and the number of small primes went down, that's not a work to me, And so I get it that in the SBA has this formula about how they calculate the goals, and you plug the numbers into their formula, you get an A, but you get an A every year under their formula. I mean, that's just the way the formula. So I think the formula is broken. I think that Yeah, it needs to reflect middle of the road performance. I mean, if you know if the performance is middle of the road, then the grade should be middle of the road, and that's kind of where it is to me too. So that says maybe a high C or something like that as an overall grade. And again, my concern um, with the system that awards A's year after year after year, despite the fact we're not meeting, five of the goals or four of the goals out of 10, is that it distracts from that negative performance. In other words, if people only see the headlines, like, oh, the government awarded a record number of dollars, which again is usually what the SBA says in their press release every year, a record number of dollars. Well, yeah, that's called inflation. That's how it works every, to get a record number of dollars to small businesses every year is not that exciting to me, because normal inflation, that's going to happen. And we got an A. All right, if that's all people see, they think the world's perfect, and it's not. And so, I would say middle of the road type grade. It's not an F. It's not a fail. The government's meeting some of these goals, and some lines are moving in the right direction. So yeah. And what was the second part of that question? I'm sorry. It's about
Also,
fraud.
do you think there's
Yep.
a higher chance of fraud now that the decline in SB set-asides continues to slip and primes become increasingly desperate to meet goals?
Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, I think the government um, is trying their best to cut down on this sort of fraud within the world they have. We've gone away from a lot of these self certifications, and some were just
Yeah,
flat out fraudulent. A lot of them were inadvertent, and but some were flat out fraudulent. Like no question about it. Small business certification has always been self certification program. Um, Maybe desperate times call for desperate measures. I think that I'm not as up to speed on where things stand staffing wise within SBA and within some of these government offices, but also losing some of those oversight personnel could play a role there. Some folks who are more inclined to do fraud might be thinking emboldened by the fact that there are fewer people maybe looking at what we're doing. SBA's enforcement priorities right now, at least on their annual reports, seem focused primarily on the lending side of the equation and less so on the contracting side. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be enforcement still going on there, but it seems, at least from the SBA's most recent report, that that's kind of the Inspector General office. That's kind of where their enforcement priorities lie right now. So we'll see. I don't know that I can really answer that question effectively, other than to say it's a kind of a new world right now, and we'll have to see where that goes. Obviously, whatever can be done to decrease fraud needs to be done. It exists out there. And there's also just inadvertent fraud anytime you have self-certification, in that ineligible
yeah,
companies think they qualify and they don't. And that happens a lot with the small business self-certification with respect to affiliation, which is a complicated set of rules, and some of it's obvious. If I own 100% of two companies, yeah, I should know they're affiliated. But then you start getting into, well, if my sister owns a company and we do a little business together, we might be affiliated. It starts getting stuff that's not
yeah.
necessarily intuitive. So I think that that's an ongoing issue, is both intentional fraud and unintentional fraud.
Yeah. And I think the good news is that, like, over the years since we've been doing this, Stephen, I mean, like, there was one point where there was no like official certification program for service disabled and veteran owned. Then there was like this massive like article about billions of dollars of fraud. VA got a black eye. That's when they kind of like went and did their thing to really stand up that certification program. And then we start now seeing other programs fall in line and realizing that self-certification poses problems, I think. So the now, if the WSB one goes through, I think you're going to see, you know, both less primes that's not going to be like, counting those as well, because now it's like they're going to say you got to also have those certified firms as subcontractors as well. Um,
Yeah, I mean, self-certification has long caused problems. It's obviously fertile ground for fraudsters. So people who are inclined to be fraudsters, well, ooh, self-certification. I'm just gonna check yes, and we're good to go. And it's just because we're talking self-certification and where you've got complexities, people just get it wrong, in good faith get it wrong, because these are complex programs with complex rules. And so eliminating, since you and I have been working together, we've eliminated SDVSB self-certification, and we've eliminated woman-owned small business self-certification. So that's happened just since we've been working together in the last 10, 12 years or so. On the small business side, I don't think that the resources exist at SBA to certify small
Yeah.
businesses. Otherwise, I would say they should, because the count of employees and revenue is not that complicated to do. And in fact, SBA has what they call like a size standards tool where you can plug in your numbers and it will spit it out. The problem with that is it completely ignores affiliation. In fact, the size standards tool, you plug in your revenues and like, yep, you're a small business under your NAICS code, except it doesn't even ask if you maybe you're a subsidiary of Walmart or something. I mean, it just pretends that affiliation
Yeah.
doesn't exist. And
Or
so
a franchise.
correct. So even that tool can give you a misleading result, and you like, oh, well, SBA said I'm a small business, and because I
Yeah.
use their tool, and their tool just the approach to the tool of with the complex problem of affiliation, which is a complex set of rules, is to pretend they don't exist. And unfortunately, if the SBA pretends they don't exist, why wouldn't a contractor pretend they don't exist until someone files a protest, and then you're getting accused of fraud and all this stuff for not knowing these complicated rules? So I wish there was a mechanism for certification of small businesses. I don't think SBA has the resources. I think the only way you could
Yeah.
do that would be to deputize uh, outside entities to do it, and the only way you can make that happen is to make it a paid thing. Somebody
Mm,
has to pay, either the taxpayers do or the
yeah.
company seeking certification do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's unfortunate. That would be a great certification. All of the ones would be really great to have certifications because, I mean, and just kind of, pointing back to the question that was asked, it's like, that is also a big area of opportunity. We talk about that in some of our webinars, that the majority of small businesses coming into what we call the government marketplace are really better poised to go in as a subcontractor. Then and again, inside of that marketplace, in the subcontractor marketplace, where you have, you know, the primes trying to like make goals again, the self-certifieds will take away from actual certified firms unless there's a way that the primes can see that. Which, by the way, I noticed that I want to give kudos to the SBA though on one thing. They got that old DSBS website up
Yep.
to date. Did you see that?
I did. And look, I mean, I love the SBA. I'm not people are like, oh, you're always picking on the SBA, but I'm like, I'm like that sibling who I'm gonna harass you until somebody else tries to go after you, and then I'm gonna pound that, because they do a good job in many,
Right.
many respects for small businesses, but they're not perfect. And so there are areas
Yeah.
where, they constructive criticism is warranted. And so my criticism of SBA is always intended to be constructive. But yeah, they do some things very well. Like that old
Yeah.
DSBS website, which had an interface that looked like, it was from the days of Netscape Navigator or whatever. Is
Yeah,
now,
you dating yourself, man.
it's a modern looking site. That's fantastic. So that's yeah. So
AOL
that's a
dial-up.
good thing. Yep, it did. It's like you're gonna hear the modem going, whatever, and then you get the DSBS interface from the late '90s or something. So yeah,
Uh,
so that was a win
yeah.
there. And again, I do recognize that SBA is limited in its resources and its budget and what it can do, both in terms of human capital and in terms of capital. So that's
Yeah.
not that's not lost on me.
I will also say this, I mean, I used to work for the SBA and they're constantly being cut back, cut back, cut back to like skeleton crews. And it's just like offices that once had like, 20 people, 20 some people have like four or three. And a lot of areas, there's not even a business opportunity specialist. So like the lender relations specialist is filling in and they have hiring freezes. It's a dire situation. And what I would say for those of you guys who are also advocating, if you're talking to lawmakers, ask them to put some more money into the, bank account of the Small Business Administration.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they need the resources to do these things and do them well. So if we say, well, we want SBA to really dive deep into the SDB program, and maybe change the rules for self certification, make it easier, that they need that's going to take some effort, that's going to take some work, and they need to have the budget and the human capital to be able to do that. And so if they're just constantly in a crisis mode responding to the problem of the moment, then going and fixing some of these kind of more back burner, but yet important things, it's got to take a back seat. It's understandable. And so, and again, on the enforcement side, if we really want SBA taking a close look at, hey, you put WSB in SAM, but we don't think you're a WSB, and they have the resources to do that, even though you're not winning a contract out of it, they probably don't have those resources right now, and the typical case is they got to focus on cases where someone is getting a tangible benefit out of it. So yeah, I think that is absolutely fund your SBA, increase their
Yeah.
funding, and let them do what they do so well, because
Yeah.
they have provided such great assistance to small businesses, and I pick at them at the margins all the time for this, that, and the other. But it is within the mindset that this is a really, really valuable agency that does a lot of great work for contractors, and could do more, I think, if they were if the reins were taken off a little bit.
Yeah. So Stephen, I think we got about two more questions. You have a few minutes or
Yeah, we'll hang out and answer. I mean, I'm the one that just kept blabbing about stuff, so then kept kept the
uh,
questions running late. So if you've got a minute or
well,
two,
we
we'll.
got like I think two more questions and
All
two
right.
more comments. So one comment is somebody mentioned that there are some minority councils like GNESMDC and others like it. Thank you. And yeah, if you guys know of some of these councils that are out there, again, grab our recording on YouTube and send it over to them and tell them, hey, there's a blueprint here on something that we could maybe do to make things better for the firms that we advocate and serve. So that would be my suggestion. Question we've got is we've been actively bidding, making down selection to number 2 or number 3 and not winning. We're responding to RFIs and we are experiencing the barrier to entry as a prime contractor. We are 8A certified and have several first tier subcontracts. We are 8A as well. What can we do when we are being blocked to marketing in the space we are in as the first tier sub K?
Yeah, I guess I don't really know how to answer that in this format here. I mean, that is a question that it sounds like is exactly the reason why that Spur Act could be helpful if you're a first time entrant to the marketplace, to have agencies actually incentivized once they down select, if
Right.
they're going with the safe choice, the one with the past performance maybe. But that's a question where, unfortunately, if it was, back, or for this environment, if this was back in my legal days, we'd sit down and have I'd say, send me the stuff you're bidding on, send me your RFIs. I'm going to review it all. Now we're going to talk. Now we're going to talk about what and who won. What were the criteria for award? Where are we falling short? Are you getting debriefings? All these sorts of
Yeah.
things. We don't have that time here. I'm not in a position to be able to offer that kind of advice. Unfortunately, I'm just going to have to punt on that question. But that said, that would be a case where I would recommend, either, if you've not done this already, setting up an appointment with your Apex Accelerator counselor to have that discussion with them, or if you're in a place where you're like, no, I need professional assistance from either a government contracting attorney or consultant who's very familiar with this, to better understand what's going on here. I need that kind of, someone's going to review my documents, review what's happening to me, tell me where the block is, in their professional opinion. Then please reach out to me or Carol. I'm sure we have folks in our networks that we would be happy
Yep.
to connect you with, who could provide that sort of consultation, because it sounds to me like that's where you're in the, I need to consult with somebody about what this
Hmm.
is type phase. And that, while I can't do that for you here, I can't do that for you at any time because I don't practice law anymore. I'm a talking head now and do other things. I'd be happy to connect with folks in my network. I know Carol would too. Or if you have not yet done this, Apex Accelerator free is a good place to start
Yeah.
for that discussion as well.
Also, we have some really great training on teaming. So that's another way that some of the, not just 8A firms, but other firms, when you come in with this performance disadvantage or an experience disadvantage, or you're just kind of like really missing some elements that you need, the mentor protege program is very powerful. And then doing teaming and joint venturing within that program. Stephen's done some trainings on this. We've done a lot of trainings on this. So if you go to the govology.com website and just go to our on-demand library and type in teaming, type in mentor protege, and specifically look for the SBA mentor protege program. There's another DoD mentor protege program, but check out that SBA mentor protege program, educate yourself. We also have some market research classes. Search for the market research classes, go through some of this education. And if you want like any other specific recommendations, just email us at support@govology.com. We can help you out. I really believe that for a lot of firms, like you're either going to come in and you're going to be a subcontractor, or you're going to connect with one of those larger firms, either a larger other than small business that can't play in the small business marketplace, or you'll find a successful 8A in your industry who's graduating out and they won't be able to get the same contracts that they used to. So they're actively looking for a partner that they can come in and support. And it's usually a pretty good win-win in that scenario. So next one's just a comment from Leslie Faircloth. By the way, Leslie is a new presenter with us here at Govology.
Yeah.
So
Excited for that.
thanks for being here, Leslie. And she says, keep on posting, Stephen. Great conversation, no questions, just taking it all in. So I encourage you also, guys, if you don't know who Leslie Faircloth is, give her a look up as well on LinkedIn and connect with her. She's doing some great things in her business and has a great background that you should learn about. And then the last question, Stephen, we have is, and I don't think we discussed this, but missed discussion on HR 2804. If there was discussion of that bill, what is the current status on Protecting Small Business Competitions Act?
No, we did not include that. We had the two bills, and they may have missed it. And by the way, I'm just going to back up and say I'm so glad to see that Leslie's going to be teaching on here. So please, when she's on the Govology platform, please take her trainings. Leslie's fantastic, huge small business advocate, has been throughout her career, and is going to be an amazing addition to this platform. So. Yeah, we had focused on those two bills, the Spur Act and the WSB Accountability Act. But it's worth a mention on that. I don't have any updates on that. The bill that you mentioned, which is the Protecting Small Business Competitions Act. What that bill is a bill that would codify the so-called Rule of Two. The Rule of Two is that rule under FAR 19, Part 19, 195022, I believe is where it's found. That says that when and this is me oversimplifying slightly here, that when a contracting officer has a reasonable expectation of receiving two or more offers from qualified, capable small businesses at fair market prices, then a small business set aside or some other species of small business contract is required. And other species of small business contract might be an 8A contract or a hub zone contract, or something like that. So it is the primary tool that the government uses to push dollars towards small businesses. When you see small business set asides, a lot of them are there because it was mandated by the Rule of Two. The Rule of Two actually, though, is Part A and Part B. Part A is for
Like
acquisitions.
Medicare?
Part A and Part B, like Medicare, it's equally messy. Just like Medicare, it's messy. Medicare's got like a Part D now or something too. But so Part A is for acquisitions between the micro purchase and simplified acquisition thresholds. Part B is for acquisitions above the simplified acquisition threshold. They read very similarly, but not quite identically, parts A and B. Why are there two parts? Because the statute only requires Part A. The underlying statute, what Congress passed into law, only requires the Rule of Two between the micro purchase and simplified acquisition thresholds. That's Part A of the FAR 19.5022. Part B is a was adopted by the FAR Council and by the SBA as part of their broader authority to write rules responding to Congress's policy request of them, which was basically write rules that promote the fair opportunity for small businesses to earn a fair proportion of federal contracting dollars. And so what they said was, I don't know, that Rule 2 looks awfully good at between the micro purchase and simplified acquisition thresholds. Let's just do that for all contracts. And that's the way it's been for decades. But that's not in the statute. And so the concern is that as we're going through this revolutionary FAR overhaul process, which is a different conversation entirely, but as the FAR is being rewritten with the instruction essentially to take out anything that is not statutory unless there's really good reason to keep it. I mean, again, I'm oversimplifying somewhat for purposes of the conversation, but that's the underlying gist of the underlying instruction of the Revolutionary Fire overhaul process. There's a concern that the rule of two above the simplified acquisition threshold will be wiped out as part of that RFO process, and we don't know if that's going to happen or not because the drafters of the Revolutionary Fire Overhaul have not yet released their draft red line of Fire Part 19. This bill was introduced a month or two ago, maybe 3 months now, to solve that problem by inserting the rule of two above the simplified acquisition threshold into the underlying statute. That would prohibit the FAR Council, under instructions from an executive order, perhaps from eliminating the rule of two above the SAT. So that one is one of those bills that has not yet advanced. It has been introduced. I know it has gotten support from various industry groups that have said, "Yeah, we need to do this. We need to codify the rule of two above the SAT in statute to protect small businesses moving forward from any elimination of that rule or watering down of that rule." There's been a suggestion, again, rumored suggestion, that we're going to take that rule out of the FAR and just make it a kind of a discretionary guidance as opposed to a requirement. And so that's what that bill would do. It would codify that rule of two. I don't have any further updates for that. It's been introduced and referred to committee. I believe it's in the Small Business Committee over in the House. And if that committee votes on it and I've learn of that, I will certainly report that or any other details that I know on my LinkedIn about that bill. But as of we sit here today, I have not seen any advance yet on that bill that's in the House that would, again, codify the rule of two above the simplified acquisition threshold to protect the policy that is currently in the FAR from potentially being changed as part of this FAR overhaul process.
All right. Well, hey, Stephen, that's all of the questions today. Thank you so much for your time. And I just want to leave on one note, and it was some that I mentioned earlier, but for those of you guys who may be concerned about like any of the things that we talked about or wanting to work towards making a positive impact out there, there's definitely things that you could do. One thing you could do is, of course, reach out to your local congressional representatives. I've done that a couple of times and I've gotten a response. And so, and I've gotten some assistance as well. So I would say not to think that like you're powerless out there. The other suggestion I would make is to join up with some of these organizations that are out there advocating on your behalf. There's National 8A Association. There's a Hub Zone Council. Almost every certification has one, and maybe not the SDB. So there's no SDB. Maybe somebody can start an SDB association, but we know that there's other associations out there that can support. I would actually, if you don't know where to start, maybe just Google, or use AI. That's kind of the new thing these days is like, what associations are, the best associations for me as an 8A contractor or as a WOSB, and get involved, and make your voice heard through them. And then through a collective, go after and make some positive changes and make your voices heard out there and your concerns. Stephen, you have any last suggestions on that? What else people can do?
Yeah, I mean, those are great suggestions. Reach out to your members of Congress, for example, for one of these bills that you want to see passed. Those organizations that Carol mentioned often do have lobbying arms, and there's power in numbers often to join with like-minded folks and get that done. But if for example, the elimination of the rule of two would potentially decimate your small business, well, let your member of Congress know that I'm a local small business, and if this happens, it could really be devastating for me. Here's a bill. Here's a solution. Please support this bill. There's nothing that can, no harm that can come from doing that. I would also point out, with respect to the Revolutionary Fire overhaul process itself, that the folks who are busy drafting that, the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, FAR Council, those folks who are not your elected officials. They are, they are
Fire revolutionaries.
they're regulators who are responding to an executive order. But they still are offering the opportunity to be heard. So if you go to the Revolutionary Fire Overhaul uh, page, and you can just go to your favorite search engine and type Revolutionary Fire Overhaul, you should see an opportunity to make your voice heard to those folks as well. And again, they're not your elected officials, but they do want to hear from the community. And so the more that they hear about anything that's going on in that area, again, this is not the bills we talked about, but things that are going on with the Revolutionary Fire Overhaul process. Feel free to make your voices heard to those folks as well, so that they know that the decisions they're making as regulators are impacting real people out there. Could impact real people out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen. And thank you guys for joining us. This concludes this episode of our GovCon Roundup live show. We look forward to seeing you again next month. Again, this show will be available on demand on our YouTube channel. Just look for Govology's YouTube channel. And if you want to join us again, of course, go to govology.com /roundup, and you'll see the link to register for our next show, which we do monthly, typically on the third Wednesday of each month. So, Stephen, thank you again, and thanks for giving us a little bit of extra overtime today.
Hey, thanks, Carol. No, I appreciate you doing the same, and always enjoy chatting with you about this. What's going on in federal contracting? Look forward to next
Yeah, it's
month's.
fun.
Yeah, so it's a lot of fun.
Brings your articles to life. I
And it
love it.
does, yes.
Yeah.
And so this will be fun, and look forward to next month's. Hope everyone can join us for that one as well.
Yeah. All right. Take care, everyone. We'll see you soon.